Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. Welcome back to another edition of Impactful Teamwork. My name's Julia Felton. I'm going to be your host and guide for the next 20 to 30 minutes while we delve into everything about teams. And today, I'm prompted to want to talk to you about the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. This is based on the work of Patrick Lencioni, who wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And if you've never read it, it's an incredible fable, really short and easy to read, but it provides some really compelling insights and an incredible framework for how to get our teams to work more effectively together. I've always been a big fan of Patrick Lencioni's work, and when I first came across this model a number of years ago, I did make a promise to myself that I would finally get certified to be able to deliver workshops around this model. And so this has been on my bucket list of something to do for a long time, and eventually, a couple of weeks ago, I actually completed the training. So really excited about that. And one of the reasons I'm excited about it is because the model provides a great framework for how we can create amazing cohesive relationships at work. And who doesn't want teams that work more effectively together? We've always spoken about teamwork being this superpower in business. And I think his framework provides a way for us to tap into the power of teamwork within our organizations. And the other reason I was excited to do this is because I've been mulling over for a long time about how do we apply this model to the work that I do with the horses, and really come up with some good ideas about how we can bring the model to life through exercises with the horses. So I'm going to be really excited about sharing that with you going forward. But let's first of all delve into the model, Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Cohesive Behaviours of a Team, because it's comprised of 5 areas, as it sounds. And I'm just going to give you a quick outline of what they are first before we delve into them. If you imagine you've got a triangle, at the base, we have trust. So trust is the foundation of everything that exists in the model. Then the second level up is conflict, and then commitment, and then accountability, and then results. And each phase builds on the next one. So we really would struggle to get great results without good trust. We would struggle to get accountability without commitment. So let's just talk a little bit about each of these different layers, for example, in the model. And I want to just share some examples of how we can use that in business. So we've talked a lot on this podcast in the past about the importance of trust, because it is the foundational behavior of a cohesive team. In my view, without kind of game-changing trust within the team, then nothing holds together. And in the context of a cohesive team, trust is defined as the willingness to be completely vulnerable with one another, to let down our guard, admit our flaws, and ask for help. So what does this mean? This means that vulnerability-based trust can only exist when we've got confidence in our peers' intentions and that they're good. And there's no reason to be protective or careful around the team. And when we don't have trust within the team, we waste time and energy concealing our weaknesses and our mistakes. And when that happens, we become hesitant to seek out help. And in the worst cases, we can assume the worst about our teammates' intentions and ability. But when there's trust on our teams, we can take all that energy required to manage our teammates' impressions of us and use it in a much more productive way. And we can draw on the collective skills and support of our team to make our jobs easier. And we'll have a solid foundation on which to build all the other aspects of teamwork. And I am a massive proponent of stopping wasting time, energy, and resources in business. And this is one way that we can have quite a quick win, is by building trust with our comrades. But of course, we're only going to be able to build that trust, as we've talked about, if we feel like we've got this psychological safety that we can say what we want to say without fear of retribution. So what does it look like to have trust in the team? It means that we can be unguarded and genuine with one another. So we can be really authentic, which is what I think we all want. We can apologize about being open about our weaknesses. We can stop apologizing and start being open about our weaknesses and our mistakes. That's a pretty liberating place to be. And we can start giving one another the benefit of the doubt rather than jumping to conclusions. And of course, it means that we're able to ask for help and get other people's input regarding our area of responsibility. That all helps build the relationships within the teams, which is so important. But there are some certain things that can hold us back, that mean that we don't feel safe to develop vulnerability-based trust. And this can be challenging for everybody in the team. Let's admit it. We all have fears and concerns that can hold us back and make it hard for us to let down our guard. So being aware of these fears can make it easier for us to start overcoming them. And some of the fears that could hold us back are things like not wanting to lose influence with other people. Maybe it's a fear of disapproval, a fear of a loss of control. Sometimes as a leader, we feel that we need to be able to do everything, to be in control of everything. And, in my experience, that's not what happens with shared leadership. Concern about appearing weak. Or we might not want to appear incompetent, that we don't know something. So we've got this fear of feeling foolish or looking foolish. And maybe when we do that, we might get some anxiety that somebody might take advantage of us. For many of us, it's sometimes a fear of criticism or a fear of not wanting to feel exposed. And maybe if you're a new team member in particular, you might not want to feel like you're going to be a burden by asking all of these questions. Ironically, I know from working in many organizations, actually, the magic happens when we ask questions. That's when we get to find out what's really going on in the business. All the unsaid things that people don't tell us what's going on is what you learn when we can ask questions. And I never find people a burden when they ask that, because the exponential learning curve is so steep for people, particularly when they join a new organization. And perhaps that's one of the challenges with remote working, is this osmosis, this learning by being in the environment of other people that we're losing. And I do have some concerns about how some of the younger generation are actually going to learn this stuff, because many of the things I learned in business weren't on my training plan of things to learn, but I heard conversations going on. I saw things happening. I was like, oh, that's how we do that. That's how we do that. So I found that really useful, that learning by osmosis. But some of the other things that can stop us being vulnerable are this fear of a loss of harmony. A lot of people want to avoid conflict within the workplace. There's also perhaps a fear of being disliked, anticipating negativity with what we say, and this fear of being perceived as a little bit naive. So those can all impact whether we show up as vulnerable. So it's really important that if we know our strengths and the things that hold us back, we can look at ways that we can build trust with our teams. And we've always talked about trust is slow to build and quick to lose. So it isn't something that happens overnight. But we do build trust through these shared experiences over time. And of course, we build trust by doing what we say we're going to do, by following through. This develops credibility and helps us get more understanding about the attributes of our colleagues. And when we know more about our colleagues and we've got better relationships with them, that can accelerate the process of building trust. So some of the habits that we could develop to help create a high trust environment, these are just a couple, there's many. I'll create a space for people to admit mistakes and weaknesses. Create this psychological safety where people feel free to speak up about what's going on. You'd be ready to apologize for our mistakes. We are all fallible. We don't get things right all of the time as much as we might want to. And actually, we're much better to admit what we haven't got right and take the right, uh, uh, the right journey, the right path to correct what we've done, rather than just try and hide it. Because whenever we hide something that we've not done correctly, in my experience, that always comes back to bite me. And it's also important that we really focus on building conscious connections within the workplace, making sure that all of our teammates are part of our inner circle, that we're getting to know everybody and as many people as we can. Because when we consciously build those connections, then that improves trust and we've got better relationships across the board. And I think I've shared the story before of the situation that I had when I was working both Arthur Andersen and Deloitte, where I needed to get a number of reports always printed by a print room. And we were always on quite a tight deadline in order to get those done. And even though I was heading up the division, I always went down and put my own printing order in and collected my own printing. And I guess that's because when I set up the business unit, I was the only one. I was the only person to do it at the beginning. But I built those relationships with the gentlemen in the print room. And that paid me dividends so many times over because they got to know me. And every time I needed to get something done, I was always able to jump the queue and get to the front. It made such a difference. So this is the importance of relationships and why relationships make an organization work. They lubricate everything that's going on. So the second pillar is about conflict. So by building the trust, a team can transform conflict into something really powerful and constructive. And I think this is really important because when team members feel safe engaging in passionate and sometimes emotional debates, knowing they're not going to be punished or resented for saying something that might otherwise be interpreted as destructive or critical, people will speak up. And so we get this really genuine pursuit of truth going on within the organization. And I know a lot of people I speak to don't really like engaging in conflict, but it is so important because conflict is often considered taboo, particularly at work. And people can spend a huge amount of time and energy trying to avoid the conflict and in doing so, avoid getting into passionate debates which actually are essential to any great team. But teams are willing to engage in productive conflict, resolve issues, and create the best possible solutions in the shortest period of time. So what do we mean by productive conflict? We mean that the debate is focused on concepts and ideas and avoids mean-spirited personal attacks. And this kind of ideology is very distinct from the destructive fighting and politics that hamper some teams. And it's far more productive than tepid discussions that hold people back from their true opinions and leave critical but unresolved issues just lying under the surface. And I'm sure if you're like me, you've always experienced that where you've had a conversation with somebody and they've given a bit of feedback to you, but they've not really said everything. And you just know that there's something bubbling under the surface that's unsaid. And that actually is really frustrating, I think, for both parties. So what does it look like to have productive conflict on a team? It's about voicing your opinions, even at the risk of causing disagreement, seeking out your teammates' opinions during meetings, confronting and dealing with the most important and difficult issues, and exploring everyone's ideas to uncover the best solutions. And I know some of the most difficult conversations that I've avoided actually when I have, as I sometimes say, put my big girl's pants on and had the conversation. It's never been as bad as I thought it was going to be. I don't know why we always imagine that some of these conversations are going to be really difficult. Actually, oftentimes when I've had conversations, particularly with team members, perhaps when I've had to give some difficult feedback, actually the team members been really relieved because it's something that they've been struggling with and they haven't wanted to mention it. And actually you can hear this kind of visible relief when we've actually had the conversation. Obviously, when we're approaching conflict, it's on a scale, isn't it? And we said we don't want to get into this personalized conflict, which is when you become a spirited debater, when you're trying to be really expressive and mean-hearted. And at the other end, there's the calm debater, which we tend to be much more measured in our dialogue. And so at that point, we remain a lot more unruffled. And of course, when we're having conversations that we might perceive as being in conflict or having some conflict around them, then we always want to stay receptive to new ideas and be open to what to do. So, how do we master conflict? The first step to engaging in productive conflict is acknowledging the conflict exists and could be a good and necessary thing that will ultimately benefit the team. And when we've got that mindset, it's easier to speak up for your ideas, consider the ideas of others, and confront issues. So there's a few ways that you can start developing good conflict habits. And one might be making the space for your teammates to share their opinion. Maybe this is some kind of open forum, and making sure that we don't feel like we have to bring people around to our way of thinking. There's many ways that we can approach pieces of work within the organization. And just because somebody doesn't do it my way doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it the wrong way. There's many ways that we can approach this. So we really want to create this environment, create this psychological safety where people can share their opinions. We always want to keep focused on the ideas and avoid drifting towards personal attacks. So we really want to keep to the facts in point. Recognize that some people might overreact and we might see an explosion of passion or anger, but then try and get it straight back to what is the facts that are really being said. And also, of course, one way that we can help embrace having conflict is being comfortable with being wrong and then being willing to listen to other people's ideas. It's all about showing this vulnerability. This is very much linked to the vulnerability-based trust that we talked about previously. So this is about taking our ego out of the equation and consider when the idea you're advocating for is truly a deal breaker or whether you could achieve something in a different way. So once we've mastered the conflict, we move up to commitment. So by engaging in productive conflict and tapping into team members' perspectives and opinions, a team can confidently commit to buying into a decision, knowing that they benefited from everyone's ideas. Because people won't actively commit to a decision if they've not had the opportunity to voice their opinions and ask questions and understand the rationale behind it. And this is one of the things I see a lot in business, us not having the commitment of team members. And it's often because they don't really understand why we're doing something. So if team members don't commit and they're just half-heartedly going along with decisions, it means they're unlikely to have the kind of alignment really necessary for us to achieve our goals. And in the context of cohesive teams, commitment is clarity around decisions and moving forward with complete buy-in from every team member, even those who initially disagreed with the decision. And the two greatest causes for a lack of commitment are this desire for consensus and this need for certainty. And the thing is, that's not possible in every situation. And great leaders understand this, and they understand that they must be able to commit even when the outcome is uncertain and not everyone initially agrees. Because if you don't get this, team members will overanalyze and second-guess decisions, revisit discussions again and again, and be unclear about where the focus should be. So what does it look like to have commitment on a team? It's about being clear about the team's overall direction and priorities, ending discussions with clear and specific resolutions and calls to action, leaving meetings confident that everyone is committed to the decisions that were agreed upon, and supporting group decisions even if you initially disagree. And I'm sure you've probably all been in meetings where people walk out of the meeting and everyone's got a completely different view about what was agreed to. So there is no commitment, or the commitment is to completely different things. So, what are some of the barriers to commitment? What might stop you seeking this clarity? Sometimes it's because we're very excited. We want to get a new project up and running, and we don't do enough groundwork, this foundational work. So important that we get everybody on the same page. And sometimes we don't get the commitment because we've stayed too much in the big picture. We haven't really clearly defined the goals and actions that need to happen in order to get the result that we want. And for some leaders, it can just be our attitude. I can be guilty of this. A bit like, we'll just go with the flow and see what happens. But remember, there's lots of different types of people on our team. And some people really need that detail and structure in order to move forward. They won't be bought into what's going on if you are trying to run a project by the seat of your pants, going with the flow, when there's somebody that needs a lot of detail to give them that level of certainty. So what can make it hard for people to buy in? Often it's because, as I mentioned earlier on, they don't really understand why we're doing what we're doing. And they haven't had the opportunity to express their concerns and reservations about the path we're taking. So this is why we need to create this space so everyone can have a say. Because teams that commit can move forward with confidence in their decisions, secure in the knowledge that everyone's moving towards the same end goal. And when this clarity or buy-in is missing, the result is a lack of alignment. And I've seen this, these small gaps in alignment can quickly become major problems or disagreements. So there's a few ways that we can develop good habits. Sometimes it's about providing as much clarity as possible to our teammates. And really importantly, actually, in a meeting, don't assume that silence means that people understand. I know often we'll go in a meeting, we'll explain something, and goes, everyone understand that? And you'll be met with crickets, nothing will be said. And you might get the odd nod of the head. And we just assume then, because nobody speaks up, that everyone's on the same page. But that's often not the case. And the clarity comes actually from getting everybody to feed back and say what they understand that they're doing by when and what time frame. Because then you know whether we've all heard the same thing and we're all on the same page. We develop good commitment habits from making sure everyone has a chance to air their concerns. And it's really important as well that we support decisions even when we don't agree with them. We need to set aside our reservations if a different course of action is decided. And recognize that sometimes we just have to accept the team's decision. But we'll feel better about that because we've already had the opportunity to express our concerns. So then we move on to the fourth pillar, which is about embracing accountability. And accountability, I think we can probably all agree, has become a bit of a buzzword. It's so overused, has so many different interpretations that it's lost a lot of its meaning. But in the 5 cohesive behaviors of a team, in this work by Patrick Lencioni, in the context of teamwork, accountability means the willingness of team members to call their peers on performance or behaviors that might hurt the team. And this can be a tough behavior to implement because it means having some difficult conversations with a team member when they are not doing what they say that we're going to do. Because as we talked about already, many of us will rather avoid these difficult conversations. But when we don't hold each other to account, teams risk encouraging mediocrity, missing deadlines and key deliverables, and losing sight of the obligations of the team. And this can create resentment over different standards of performance. So what does accountability look like on a team? It's about offering and accepting unsolicited constructive feedback. It's about feeling pressure from your peers and the expectation to perform. So a bit of this peer pressure within the team. It means when we've got accountability, we're not afraid to confront our peers and colleagues about problems in their respective areas of responsibility. And it also allows us to question one another about our current approaches and methods. And maybe that means we come up with something different. So how do we provide this feedback to people? So when we're providing feedback, we've got a couple of options. We can really address the problem or we can sugarcoat it, which is what, as I've mentioned earlier on, often happens. And then we find the problem brewing under the surface. And when we're also giving feedback, we really need to be attentive to people's feelings. Recognize that some people might feel a bit discombobulated by what we've told them, a bit surprised. And we need to provide the opportunity then for the other team member, our peer, to come back and say, no, actually, this is what I'm doing. And maybe we've got the wrong perception. Maybe we don't really know what's going on. So we've really got to be attentive to people's feelings, but really also stick to the logic and stay based on fact. What I observed was, because we always want to, when we're giving feedback to people about their performance, relate it to something we've observed, then it's tangible for people to understand. So as uncomfortable as it can be, accountability can help a team and an organization avoid more costly and difficult situations later on. But teams can only really embrace this behavior if all the team members recognize this is a shared responsibility and develop the habits that can help encourage accountability on the team. And some of these habits are things like following through on our personal commitments, accepting questions and inputs from teammates, and being thoughtful in the approach to holding team members accountable. So once we've got this accountability, we can move to the final area, which is all about getting results. Because if teammates are not being held accountable for their contributions, they're more likely to turn their attention to their own needs and to the advancement of themselves or their departments. And an absence of accountability is an invitation for team members to shift their attention to other areas than collective results. And we've talked about the need for alignment, and this is why we need collective results. So accountability helps a team avoid the more costly and difficult situations later on. And it allows the team to embrace this last critical behavior, the focus on results. Because ultimately, that's what we want in business, isn't it? We're in business. We need to deliver results. And in the context of a cohesive team, results refer to the collective goals of the team. And they're not limited to financial measures, but are more broadly related to expectations and outcome-based performance. And what we've observed and what we've seen is teams that fail to concentrate on results stagnate. They become distracted. They lose achievement-orientated team members on the team. But what would a team focus on other than results? One common culprit is team status. And this is where merely being part of a group is satisfying enough regardless of the results. And another common roadblock is the familiarity tendency of people to focus on enhancing their own positions or career prospects at the expense of the team. So this is the ego-based leadership. It's all about me. It's not about we. And these collective results only come about through this collaborative approach that we've been talking about, having trust, embracing conflict, having commitment and accountability. That's when we get the cohesiveness coming through the team that allows us to achieve superior results. So what does it look like to have results on a team? This is all about us valuing collective success more than individual achievement, willingly making sacrifices in your area for the good of the team. And when a team fails to achieve collective goals, taking personal responsibility to improve the team's performance and being quick to point out the contribution and achievements of others. So when we focus on results, what we get is this collective synergy of a cohesive team working together. And isn't that all what we want in business? We really want to get the results that we are in business for. And this is why it's also so important for teams to have a really clear purpose, so that we all know the results that we're striving for. And if we know those results that we're striving for, then I personally think that we are more likely to feel confident to embrace those areas of conflict and commitment and accountability because we know what the end game is. So this week, my invitation to you is, how are you going to continue to build trust in your organizations? How are you going to encourage people to engage in healthy debate about what's going on and get everyone's different perspectives? How are we going to get people to commit to what needs to be done? And then importantly, hold their peers accountable for what everyone's doing in the team. So we get this echo leadership rather than ego leadership. With the echo team, everyone in the ecology of the team, if we take the nature analogy here, is all pulling together to get to those business results. I hope you found these insights into the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team really interesting. If you would like to have a discussion about how you can apply these principles within your own team, I'd always love to do that. One of my things, and you know my passion, is building cohesive teams. And I'm so excited I've now got this as an additional tool in my toolkit that we can use to help you build the teams. Because teamwork is this competitive superpower. We are wasting so much time, energy, and resources if we don't leverage our people and harness their energy to help them work effectively together. All right. So that's all for this week. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Have an amazing week and enjoy creating your cohesive team. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?